another episode of Gov Tech Today. I'm Russell Lowery, and with me today is a special episode. We're going to have the CEO of Ametnas, Michael Sekamanya. Sekamanya, did I say that right?
That is correct, yes.
All right, Michael Sekamanya. Normally, we're bridging the gap between .com and .gov. We help explain technology primarily to the public sector and maybe explain the public sector to the private sector and kind of bridge that gap. But the AI hype has gotten out of control lately. It's hard to open your phone or cross the internet in conversation. It's everywhere. ChatGPT was a game-changing moment. So I thought I'd have you on because you're actually an expert in AI and have been thinking a lot about this long before most of the general public heard about ChatGPT. So we thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time.
Thank you.
So why don't we just start with, what is your company and how long have you been around and what is it that you do?
So my company is called Ametnas, and what we do is we basically help businesses orchestrate their business applications, but focusing mainly on privacy and security. So by that we mean that we give you, the business, the freedom of choice of wherever you want to host this business application. So it can be in your private VPC, in your data center, or on-prem. We just basically allow you that freedom of choice. Essentially, the current status quo is you need a business application such as a CRM, you go to a SaaS provider. But then, unwittingly, your data is in the public domain. Well, it's basically in the cloud. Now, and that is fine for most businesses, but for various businesses, they want to know exactly where their data is, usually for compliance and regulatory reasons. So we give businesses that freedom of choice.
So you're building a system that is their business application. Do you build the business application, or they've already got it, and you're simply providing the security or the hosting?
Yeah. So we essentially are running the business applications in their private environment.
Got it.
So they provide the infrastructure, and we just, with our platform, just helps us orchestrate the whole day-to-day operations, such as provisioning the application, maintaining the application, security patching, vulnerability testing, upgrades, all the whole day-to operations, where they would have needed an expertise, some kind of expert to actually do that for them. We basically make that seamless for them. Now, the second part of your question is, do they provide these? Are they business applications they provide? So we are looking after standard business applications that do standard things such as CRMs, anything that has been built to serve a generic purpose. So it could be, for example, if you look at some of the customers that we deal with are for example, within the banking sector or the finance sector. And they've got some financial management systems or productivity solutions that are tailored, for example, for a healthcare function. So whilst they might be off the shelf or written by a particular business or a particular software vendor, we can orchestrate the deployment. So essentially, we can cut what would have taken 2 weeks to shrink it down to 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you've talked about it mainly in business applications, but when I hear that, there's a lot of government sector entities who have personally identifiable information, sensitive information, private and personal information, tax returns, a variety of use cases where you're required to turn over your data to the government, and now they're stewarding this information. It seems natural, but does your technology have that application to the public sector as well?
Oh, yeah. So it does definitely have application to the public sector. And now when you're talking about the kind of things that, for example, that are required, if you look at sensitive data such as healthcare is a very good example. Healthcare information is needed, for example, when it comes to things such as actuaries or things, insurance, something like that. That information is private to me, but I have to oftentimes share it with the government.
Right.
Right? You see what I mean? So, but ultimately, I need to have control of that data. And obviously, I'm obligated within regulatory bounds to share it with the authorities. So we do cater for all those scenarios and make sure that for example, where a sensitive government organization such as a judiciary or an insurance company or or prisons, for example, there's sensitive data there. We can help the government be able to, or government entity to be able to hold that data wherever they wish to hold it.
Okay, so we started talking about some of the applications, and I want to get some more into that. But I want to take a step back and say we've been talking about AI and artificial intelligence and interacting with ChatGPT and these large language models, but relatively recently for most people.
Yeah.
What's been your experience? Have you been thinking about this? Did it pop up on your radar when ChatGPT came out, or were you already working in this space?
So that's an interesting question. So when we started to build Ametnas, now ChatGPT hadn't really come. Obviously, they were building it,
Right.
but it hadn't really come up to where it is right now.
Right.
Now we had some effort to, for example, allow, because we essentially allow customers to orchestrate their applications. Usually, every business application has some kind of data, either sitting in a database or in files or in emails. Some way, shape, or form, there is data underneath. Without data, there's nothing, right? It's just a shell. So we had started to build something that would allow customers, for example, to interact or chat with their data. And we had built it for about 2.5 years. And we hadn't really gone into releasing it into the public. And we actually invested quite some money into hiring resources to build it. But then when obviously ChatGPT came out, it opened our eyes to a certain different way of doing things than the one we had. And even though we had built these models, now all of a sudden a lot of different open source models were coming out, and you've got all these great contributors in the open source world that just seem to be able to work at some light speed. So we were able to leverage that and take advantage of that to actually enhance on the platform.
Okay, so I'm going to walk it back. When I talk to some people about data, there's some nervousness that most people's self-assessment is that their data is a mess.
Yeah.
And am I even ready to enter this world if my data is a mess? Should I reach out to Ametnas if I'm just not even sure that my hodgepodge of data is organized well enough at this point to take advantage of your service?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we had this conversation with a customer, and they basically saw the absolute value of what we were proposing to them, where we talk about the AI solutions that we have on our platform. And his comment was that, look, before we can start even considering using AI, we need to clean up our data. Right. And we are solving that problem. It's actually a big problem. Just a few days ago, we spoke to a customer based out in the north, I think in Chicago. And the problem that he gave us a scenario that was quite interesting, where he said that, look, sometimes we have the same version of, say, 2 or 3 different versions of the same document. Say, for example, you go to a meeting, and then you iterate over meeting minutes until you all agree that these are the minutes. But unknowingly, you save all those into a document repository. Right now, if you're going to be chatting with those documents, which version are you going to consider? Right? So nobody ever cares to go and clean up because the human will certainly know that this is the most recent version, and only at a point in time when they need to. But if you're looking at, say, a 5-year-old bunch of versions of the same documents, how do you know that this is the most recent one? So it's a real problem, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So there is a lot of cataloging, cleaning the data, labeling the data, tagging the data that has to go through, and these are issues that are being faced by the majority of companies trying to bring AI products to the market.
Okay, so you do have to first do some cleanup work on that data. It's just part of the process. I try and explain to customers if you haven't done it, the best time to start is now.
Absolutely.
And if you wait another day, it's just going to get a little bit harder than it was the day before. So you just gotta take that step.
Absolutely. So just to add on that, so some of the things that we are currently actively looking at is building models that are able to smartly cater and intelligently be able to organize this information, find similarities, and then find deltas between different chunks of data, and then being able to string them up to create some sort of cohesive story where you can then tell that, okay, this is the same, this is two of the same things, uh, but you need to eliminate these because based on these rules, this is what you need to be looking at. It's a challenging problem, but it's something that we are looking at.
So when we looked at that video clip, that little 6-minute clip from from Chris Powers and his CEO on at Fort Capital, that would have been two non tech native people. These are hardcore real estate business professionals. They want to run the best real estate company in the world. But they don't necessarily have that tech, or they didn't start out with that tech expertise. Do you need an on-site tech expert in order to deploy your solution, or can I be a business expert in my business and what I need and still work with you?
Oh yeah, so really good question that really resonates with us. So the reason that we have one of the main reasons for us building our platform is to make it easy to orchestrate these business applications in your environment. So it's point and click, giving you that Windows-like experience where you do not need to be technical at all. We want to make it, if you want the solution now, you should be able to, within 4 or 5 clicks at the most, be able to do what you need to do, and the rest is for us. And it should be no more than half an hour or an hour at the most. We don't have anything that takes, by the way, 15 minutes. But
Right.
we are scoping. You never know, some applications do take a while to provision. But our platform can make that seamless for you. Now, there's a different part to that question, which is when it comes to, so this is the deployment. You can get the deployment set up, the ease, everything. Once it's deployed and up and running, it's more a case of now usability, right? But the other part of the fact is we now need to connect into your data sources and start cleaning them up, reading the data using what they call the RAG process. So obviously, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
So you've got to have some sort of data governance and management process in place that makes sure that the data is cleansed. Usually within large organizations, you have a function and somebody who is designated for that particular role.
I've used the Elation data catalog, and it has a way of ranking and sorting the data and using some AI tools to classify and get people up to speed on it. I found that useful. I'm sure there are other good cataloging solutions out there, but I like the Elation one. So if I'm interested in getting started in this, what are the kinds of questions I need to ask, or how do I get started? How do I begin?
So, okay, here's the thing, right? Obviously everybody now knows that we've gone away from the search capabilities that we had before, where you punch in a statement and then the system goes away and sort of just looks for similar statements and just returns the result. Everybody's expectations are slightly different now. You know, the majority of people have actually touched ChatGPT, or at least heard of it.
Right.
So now they know that people know we can find this information in a much more clever way. So where I'm going with this is basically you need to know what you want to get out of it.
Yeah,
You need
okay,
to have some clarity of what you want to get out of it. And we'll touch on security, because that's a very relevant aspect. Because when you, for example, if you're within the enterprise, you've got different chunks of data, right? And part of the governance is making sure that Michael can access this information, but Russell can't. Or Russell can access this information, but Michael cannot, because of different security clearances. For example, if you look at defense, within the defense or the military, there's going to be a security clearance or access levels. So you need to have that whole structure figured out and understand, okay, that this can either be touched or not touched at all. So all that has to be thought about before you just jump right in.
That's a great point. I'm thinking about it from the government side, let alone as opposed to the business application side. But I know in government, You have some data that's stored on-prem. You'll have some that is off-prem but in a data center, and then still other data that is in the cloud. And there may be a transition plan for all of that, but I've got a business use case today. And I'm worried. I want to use some of the language model tools, but I don't want those tools to be trained on my sensitive data. Are you able, if someone were to bring you in, someone were to say, hey, talk to me about how to do this, could you help them to design a solution where they're able to get some of the benefits of AI without putting the state data at risk?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we've got a solution called Nessus AI that is based open source for starters, but it can be deployed completely privately. Meaning that if you have that scenario that the use case you just described, you can get our solution and deploy it completely in your private environment. Now, then the next part is you do not want to, obviously the challenge there is now you need to start feeding your data, right? So by that solution being in your private environment, you are able to get your private data pumped into this solution, and none of that data can leak out. But the best part of it all is that going back to what the Ametnas platform does is we can orchestrate all that for you, so it becomes seamless. So because one of the challenges that we face, Russell, is that many enterprises would like to be private, but then they consider the cost of having to manage these systems, because you have to have bums and seats, you have to have the expertise, you have to have the monitoring in place, you have to have all this stuff that you get for sort of not for free. No, it's not for free, but you pay for at a cut price in the cloud. Then what we're saying, no, you can get the best of both worlds by running all of your applications in your private environment, but we'll look after them for you there as well, meaning that you can still keep your costs down. Now, going back to the AI solution, we can orchestrate that completely in your private environment. It's open source. You can choose to either use our platform, or you can have, if you got expertise in-house, you can go ahead and deploy it yourself. So it's really up to you.
It's flexible. So if you've got the expertise and the equipment and the budget, you go this route. If you're missing any of those components, either people, processes, or budget, you can go and use different pieces of the. You've built a very flexible Ametnas tool to address those needs. But you also talk about security. How is what you're offering? What kind of security features are you offering? And you sounded pretty confident when you talked about keeping it on-prem. But if you're interacting, how are you interacting with a public model and still feel like I'm generating security with my data in my secure environment?
So there are multiple components that are involved, and it's important to understand this. So there is usually the most expensive component is the LLM inference service, i.e., for example, what the OpenAI API can do for you. You can sort of structure your query programmatically and send it to OpenAI. It's a public endpoint. So to many organizations, that's a no-no. For example, I've heard of Canadian banks that will not go down that path at all. So in that case, there are open source solutions that you can still bring in-house, and all that will be run in your on-prem environment. There is a bit of a challenge though, which is the fact that most of these LLMs require high GPU usage, right? And GPUs are expensive and they are scarce as well. So I spoke to a customer 3 days ago who they are challenged because they've got the budget. They've got the budget. And then they've gone to one of the big cloud providers, and the cloud provider just says, look, we just don't have capacity. You see, so they've got the budget, but the cloud provider just does not have capacity. So GPUs are rare.
They've got the budget to access it via the cloud. They just don't have the GPU capacity, which is going to change people's calculation on whether they need to bring this in-house. If I add the cost so that I have the access to the GPUs, am I better off than maybe before?
Yeah, that's the thing. So, but there are enterprises that already have GPUs in place, that have already invested in, for example, research institutes. One of our customers is a research institute, and they essentially are, they already have their own private data centers, and they already have GPUs. They are looking to add more GPUs. But the problem is that because obviously there's now a real need. Before they were only using them for experimentation, for dev work, but now they want to bring it into the mainstream, i.e., and the enterprise users wants to be able to use an application that requires GPUs. So, but they need more. Do you see what I mean? So, and that's the challenge. So, going back to where we were, if you have the GPUs and you have access to them, you can run the complete solution in your private environment. When it comes to security, though, Russell, there are other aspects to security. So that by ring fencing the whole solution in your private environment, you've achieved at least the basic part of security. But then what about access? There's access control, which is another element. We touched on it a while ago, where it means that whilst I've got everything is in my private environment, does that mean I've all of a sudden got access to all the information that the GPU, the GPT can give me? It shouldn't be the case, right? And it's not the case with many organizations because there's sensitive data being pumped into this RAG process. The vector database is now hostings a whole lot of data, and some of which could be sensitive. So now you need a role based you need a layer of security that sort of manages based on the user's access rights, can filter out what information that is given to one user based on their role within the organization, just because then they can be held accountable, right? So there's that layer as well, and we've done a lot of work on that to make it easy for an enterprise to actually enforce that layer of security, meaning that when I'm chatting with the data and the data has been labeled correctly or data sourced correctly, then I will seamlessly or the system will only seamlessly give me the data that I'm supposed to see. Whereas for you, you will get the data that you're only supposed to see as well. And here's a use case, an interesting one. Say supposing you're a bank and you've got your customers, you've got your banking app, every customer's got access to their bank statements, for example. And you'd like to give your customers the experience of a GPT. So that, for example, if I go in, I would like to ask, what did I spend the most on last year, kind of thing. But that is private to me, correct? It's only my information, and you should also get only access to your information. So the whole wiring and the plumbing of that has got to have that layer of security built into it, so that it's all seamless.
Right, yeah. But what LLM is answering the question. And what happens is the LLM different after having interacted with that personal data? Is it now, in some sense, been trained on that data, even though I'm the only one that has access to it, but the LLM is now different because it's interacted with that personal data?
So the issue here is that the LLM is indifferent. It doesn't really care. Or you just send it data, it answers, it does what it has to do, it does all the tokenization, and it does what it has to do. It doesn't have, but the layer of security has to be abstracted away from the LLM, close enough to where the users are. Because the LLM does not really understand the notion of a user. It does not really understand anything about a role. It just understands data.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
But it's the fact that, and also there's compliance. So the person that is making sure that Michael, or the administrator, making sure that Michael can access this and Russell can access that, it doesn't really care about the LLM. They only care about making sure that the filtering of the data is done correctly. Once that's done, and it has been achieved, when I'm interacting with the LLM, I'm going through that layer of security that will then govern what I receive back from the LLM.
Got it. Yeah. Got it. So the same question asked by a person with different access, it would get a different answer.
And different answer.
So someone with broad access might get an answer that says our customers typically spend this much on eating out, and Russell is getting the answer on how much Russell is eating
exactly,
out.
exactly.
Got it.
And that's actually that you touched on that. So if we dive a little bit deeper in that, take a different use case. Think about a use case where you've got PII information,
Right.
Either a social security number or a bank account number, credit card number as well. It could be that the customer service representative has got, as they're chatting with the data with this engine, they can access this information. But then the user on the website will not have access to that. So you've got a GPT on the website, but then the user will you're answering data, but then the engine has to filter out what it regards as PII information,
right?
And yet the service rep, they can access that information. So all that has to happen seamlessly. So that means that there is another layer of saying, oh, now we have to be able to dynamically filter out this information. But not just that. What if the definition of PII changes over time? Right. That means that, for example, my identity, either identify as a he or a she, changes over time. So all the definition of what's required by the law changes in time. So that has got to be dynamically ingested into this system without touching the main components and moving
that around. You've been working on it for years. For many of us, it's a newer thing. Is in your mind, if our listeners are maybe tuned in and they were curious, but our conversation hasn't answered their questions, is it too late? Are they hopelessly lost and far behind, or are we still at the beginning of the AI revolution?
Interesting question. So I have spoken to a few, graduates, for example. I've spoken to a few people trying to get into the field, and I keep telling them, like, look, if you dig deep into this LLM AI thing, it's actually not that different from the mathematics that you've studied at school. You probably really already understand it, and a lot of the terms that we use are different, but they are in many ways the same. For example, when you look at, for example, model weights or a bias, if terms is a bias, but if I was to dissect that for you, you think, and I relate that to a linear equation that you studied in school, I can easily translate those terms and say that's what you get. That's that.
It's a lot of it and very fast. I was thinking about that math around a vector database and billions of connections and points, but at its base, you can understand what a vector is, and then you multiply that out, and all of a sudden you understand what a vector database is.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, everybody who's done some kind of maths knows what a matrix is.
Right.
The fact that you have a dot product. You multiply. So that has then evolved, but you're doing this at a much, much larger scale. And that's the difference. So what the GPU gives you is the ability to churn these numbers at a greater scale than what a CPU would have done. Right? And that's the whole function. So it's doing this at a much, much broader scale.
Well, Michael, I appreciate you lending us your expertise today. I hope you've enlightened. I know you've enlightened me. I hope you've done that for our audience. If people want to get in touch with you or have additional questions, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way to go is to go on to either a LinkedIn. You can always shoot us a message on LinkedIn. On our LinkedIn, we're very active on LinkedIn. Or you can go onto our website, which is cloud.ametnas.com. That's cloud.ametnas.com. But find us on LinkedIn, or just search my name. You can always find and shoot us a message on LinkedIn. We'll be happy to have a greater conversations.
We'll include those links in the notes and with the episode. Again, Michael, thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.